Or when Director Elliott gets back, whichever's first.
Or second. Coffee first, yeah, very important. I mean, something a little stronger than coffee.
Okay, we ready to go?
We sure are. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Corporate Officer. So I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee, Wednesday, June the 7th, 2023, to order. First up, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Ho'ohete, also known as Lasqueti Island. We have an agenda before us. Would anyone like to make any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, would someone like to move approval of the agenda? Director Lennox, Director Brander, any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Okay, minutes. We have minutes from the Finance Committee meeting of May the 3rd, 2023. Are there any changes or revisions anyone would like to make? And seeing May the, don't we have minutes of May the 3rd? I'm looking at the wrong agenda. Oh, May the 3rd is what my agenda has.
Should be June 7th.
Oh, June the 7th. We are June the 7th. I'm talking about the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of May the 3rd. Oh, June the, or the July. Oh, okay. Why is my agenda?
I've sent you a link to the agenda.
Yeah, I'm just looking to the wrong agenda. I had the June agenda open. My apologies. Let's get to that.
Let's get you on the right agenda.
Get you on the right agenda. I had it open. I just didn't have okay, July the 5th. Right. Okay. Minutes of the.
You saw too.
Thank you, everyone. I had it open. I was just looking at the wrong one in my multi-tab. Okay, so the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting June the 7th, 2023. Are there any changes to that one? Seeing none, would someone like to move adoption of that? Director Elliott, Director Gisborne, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Okay, we have no delegations. We have some unfinished business. The first one up is reconsideration of the LIFT Community Service Financial Assistance Grant application. Chair Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I have a motion here, and I believe the staff have it. I don't know if they want to bring it up on screen, but give the corporate officer a moment to do that. Thank you. It just says that the committee recommended to the board that the board approve a grant of $50,000 to LIFT for the Community Resource Center from the Social Planning Service.
Does anyone like to second that? And I can't see, the screen is so small now.
Director Doubt.
Director Doubt. Okay, thank you, Director Doubt. Okay, discussion
I think
on that. Director Brander, did you want to say something first? I still can't.
I have a point of order.
Oh, yes.
I think if we're going to reconsider a motion, there needs to be a motion of reconsideration that has to pass.
Right, corporate officer, could you help us with the process here?
Okay, so sorry. Did we ever? I don't believe we've ever passed a motion on this item.
No, we have not.
So I don't believe that there was ever a motion. Okay, yes.
Director Doubt.
In the minutes that we just approved, there is a moved and seconded on page 13 of 15 of the minutes. The committee recommend to the board that the board approve a $50,000 grant to the Community Resource Center for Social Planning Service. I think that's a motion. You have a recommendation to the committee. My point of order is if we're going to do something, we have to first pass some motion to reconsider that decision that was made and defeated.
Thank you, Director Dowd. I think that helps. So
decision that I support.
Okay, great. So after a vote has been taken on any question except for one for tabling or postponing, a member, except for the chair who voted in the majority on the matter, may move to reconsider the motion at the same or the next regular or special meeting of the board. So we would just need to know who voted. And I'm trying to find it in my.
So I believe the vote was in favor was Director Dowd, Director Elliott, and myself, and opposed were Director Brander, Director Gisborne, and Director McCormick.
So that's in the majority though, not. So you would, Clay would be appropriate. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Director Brander. You're not Clay here.
Fine.
What are we doing this one here? Okay, so we just need a motion to reconsider now. Is that what we're asking for? Okay, so are you moving a motion to?
Sure, I believe it's the same motion.
Well, they'd be two separate.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Move a motion.
Okay, so a motion to reconsider, and is there a seconder for the motion to reconsider? Director Lennox. Okay, so any discussion on the motion to reconsider? And I have a question for the corporate officer. So if we, this motion is it just to get it back on the table? This motion to reconsider isn't the motion itself, it's just to bring it back and then we go forward.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, Director McCormick.
Thank you. Chair, I just have a question, perhaps of Director Brander. Is there new information that you have that was not considered at the previous Finance Committee meeting? Is that the basis for reconsidering?
Well, other than the delegation that appeared at the board meeting.
Okay, so that's it. Okay.
And there is to the chair, I apologize. There's the Community Resource Center Community Relations and Site Security Plan, which is included as part of this agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Could I see Director Dowd had his hand up?
I was just going to point out that there's that FYI, at least on the electronic version of the agenda that was recently placed on there, which is existing and future plans.
Okay, Director McCormick.
I haven't seen that, sorry, Jared. Because the part that I'm especially interested in, and I raised this at the last committee meeting, is there a plan? Do they have a plan for dealing with the disorder and crime in the neighborhood? Is that in the?
I see the CAO. Mr. Radke, can you help us here?
The chair, if I'm not mistaken, the assistant corporate officer sent that out yesterday.
Yeah. By email.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any further? We okay to go? Is there any further discussion on the motion to reconsider this item, which has been made? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. So on the motion to reconsider, all those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, so now we're able to reconsider, and if I understand the process, Mr. Director Brander is able to. Does that bring the motion directly back, or can he make a motion he made, which may be the same? Corporate officer.
Motion's on the table already. Now that you guys have, so now we're considering another motion. Once you've approved reconsideration.
Okay, so this puts it back on now. The original motion's on the table. Director Brander, as I doubt, I should say.
Original motion meaning the one I made today. I think it's the same motion.
It is the same.
Director Dowd, did you have a comment?
I have a comment. I read the additional plans that LIFT has, their current plans, and their plans in the future, which will require additional plans. But I think they're good plans. It's a valuable service. Frankly, saves lives in the community. And I think it's an appropriate use of regional district funds to do that. I support the new motion 100%. So I believe we could say grants $50,000 from the social planning service to the resource center. Good use of funds. I support it. I think we should all be willing to support political effort through our MLA and through others to get more provincial government support for the assistance that's needed for homeless and vulnerable people within the community. And when I say community, I mean the entire region.
Okay, thank you, Director Dowd. Is there any other discussion? Director Gisborne and then Director McCormick.
Couple of things. First is Director Dowd just brought up that this benefits the entire region. The work that LIFT does at the CRC provides a regional benefit. However, we heard from LIFT that when they approached the city to apply for a grant, it didn't fit with the city's grant criteria. So they haven't applied to the city for funding. We have now come to the regional district and asked for grant funding. In this case, $50,000. That's not a small chunk of change. It's a big chunk of change. They are not applying to get funding from the general grant and aid. General grant and aid is paid for by everyone. The social planning service is only paid for by the electoral areas, A, B, C, E, and E. The electoral areas are roughly 1/3 of the population. 2/3 of the population reside within the city limits. I find it very inappropriate to expect 1/3 of the population to pay $50,000 towards the support of the community resource center, and the other 2/3 of the population doesn't pay. What has been brought up throughout this discussion and this item is that our social planning service doesn't seem to align with the municipality's ability to provide grants for social planning endeavors. Now, the social planning service was created before my time, but my understanding was it was created to be a mechanism to partner with the municipality to fund a social planner and to fund grants that fit the social planning framework. But what we're seeing before us is, as I understand it, the city no longer has a social planner, and LIFT isn't able to apply for the grant from the city. So I'm starting to even wonder why we have a social planning service anymore. We do a service review. That's on the social planning side of it. If we do want to give money to LIFT, I would be more in support if it came from the general grant, not the social planning service. That's the first. Second issue, proper land use. The issue of the CRC is its location. Yes, it provides a benefit to the community. That is true. But it's located right next to our Tourist Information Center. And it's located right next to the dental office. In land use planning, you don't really expect to approve a industrial operation next to a school. I don't support having the CRC located next to our Tourist Information Center. We've already heard from the Tourist Bureau that the operation of the center is resulting in greater costs, and we do provide funding for that center. So we already are paying for what's going on up there. So I don't support funding the CRC in its current location because it's impacting regional district services already. That's the second one. And the third, which is probably the most important, is the vast majority of LIFT's funding comes from the province. And there's a reason for it. The provincial government is responsible for handling these kind of social issues. What's been happening over time is the province has been underfunding their responsibility and leaning more and more on local governments to pick up the slack. And my thoughts are is if we approve this $50,000 grant, a lift, then we are signaling to the province that, yeah, we'll take on the responsibility for that. We'll charge the local taxpayers to start helping lift and help these which are within the responsibility. Crunching the numbers for the electoral areas, it's like what, $8 a person from the electoral areas for this grant. I don't know if I can convince my constituents with that kind of money for Thursday when it's only coming from the electoral areas. So for those three reasons, I can't support this. It's not equitable, it's not our responsibility and jurisdiction, and it's a bad location. Well, I'm sorry. I do like the work they do, it's good work. But...
Thank you, Director Gisborne. So Director McCormick has her hand up, and then I saw Director Elliott after. So Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. When I look at the list that is on the addendum, I guess, through the agenda, and I see a number of items that are in the box: hourly rendered checks, partnership with the RCMP, really Sharp Street, good neighbor agreement, etc. Those are things that are all in place now, correct? Perhaps that is a question to staff.
Yeah, maybe to maybe the Mr. Cohen. As I see Mr. Radke has his hand up. CEO.
Through the chair, I can't comment on on what the author wrote. That is what they supplied to you at your request.
Right.
So
okay.
Any questions you have, you need to be directed through them.
Well, I would take that these are already in place because there's two items designated as new, which is the picnic area and the signage and then a caretaker. And they may help in dealing with the disorder that Tourism Fall River has been experiencing. I don't know that they'll go far enough because there's already a lot of things in place that are quite ineffective because in spite of good neighbor agreement, etc., the problems are still occurring. So I have my reservations about that. But my question, Chair, pertains to how the social planning service is funded. Perhaps Mr. Copenhagen, whatever, could answer that question, because does the city not contribute to that fund?
I believe not, but Mr. Cohenhoven can answer that for us, I believe.
Thank you, through the chair. No, the city does not participate in the social planning service. It is the electoral areas as well as the Sechelt Indian Government District.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer to that question.
Okay, you're done, Mr. Director McCormick. Okay, on to Director Elliott, and then I saw Director Brander and Director Lennox, so we'll go around and then I'll talk. But, Director Elliott.
Director Dowd as well.
Director Dowd. Okay, Director Elliott, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I think that the Community Resource Center is different than some of the other social initiatives that they contract from the province to deliver. So one of the things that happens when you're a nonprofit is you can do contracts from the government to deliver services, and you get direct funding from the provincial government for delivering those services. You're not allowed to transfer or use any of that money for any of your other charitable stuff. So the Community Resource Center predates a lot of those services and isn't funded by the provincial government at all, and has typically been funded through things like grants from local governments. And the city has quite regularly offered the permissive tax exemption. In this last go round, LIFT applied for their permissive tax exemptions in one lump sum for all of their properties, including those that were services being delivered by the provincial government. And part of the permissive tax exemption is to put forward your financial data and show that you are indeed in need of that. And they could not meet the test of financial need for all of their properties that were lumped into that one application. I suggest if they wanted to zero in on properties that were not funded by the provincial government in the future and apply for just those ones, they might have a different response. I don't know for sure. I'd have to talk to some folks who knew more about that. But it wasn't because the city didn't want to fund the Community Resource Center. The Community Resource Center is unique in the services that it provides. It links poverty law, it links social workers, clinical workers on the mobile team, provides access to even pharmaceutical services for folks who can't find what they need elsewhere. They have clinics there for various health-related things that people wouldn't be able to access unless they had a family doctor, which most of these people do not. There's ways to link folks who are fleeing violence to the services they need. So the Community Resource Center is not a service provided by the provincial government. They're a service that is being funded through wholly fundraising, nonprofit, volunteers, and because it's a service our community definitely needs with that is on the rise as well with the price of housing going up. More people are finding themselves in need of these kinds of connections because they don't know how to access these resources because they've never needed them before. And many of the problematic crime problems in the street are actually, they've reported, and I believe them, and I've heard it from the dentist as well next door, that it's not so much when they're open, because the staff do a great job when they're open. The problem is when they're closed. I fail to see how putting them in a position where they have to have less hours and be closed more is going to address any of those issues whatsoever. And I also don't understand the idea that we should hold one community organization responsible for what's happening in our community when they're closed. I don't get the rationale there at all. They did fight and got more funding for 24-hour shelter, which has been helping. It gives people a place to go all the time right now. So that's helping. What helps is increasing connection for people in our community, increasing services that they need. I don't see how withdrawing funding and services from people who are desperately needing them and vulnerable is going to solve our problem. If you want to transition to something else, that's a bigger conversation where we take all the parties to the table, we transition for the future. Chopping people off at the knees and while they're bleeding, asking them to make a new plan is really a bad idea, in my opinion. I think the city could easily participate in funding LIFT. I would be in favor of that. We don't currently have a funding mechanism for them to apply for that. We have community forest grants, which aren't really social in nature, but would help with infrastructure. And LIFT has received some of that in the past for some of their infrastructure needs. We have the permissive tax exemptions, which the vote has passed this year for that. And I'm not entirely sure why we haven't considered having the city added to the social planning grant process that we have here. I don't have the history on that either because I'm fairly new to this board. I don't really know why we do these things the way we do. I'd be very interested in hearing about that. But for this year, if we can't get the social planning envelope to fund this particular purpose, I would be in favor of moving it to general grants and aid where we can participate. I don't want to just do this not funding LIFT thing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott. Director Brander was next, and then Director Lennox.
Great, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I am willing to support this motion. I made the motion. I'm willing to support this motion because I think that LIFT coming down here and appearing as a delegation and them writing up their plan is evidence that they recognize that there are issues and they're looking for solutions to either take initiatives on their own or to form partnerships with other organizations in our community or potentially on a provincial level. So I see that their attention has been brought to it, and I appreciate that, but I also think they do a lot of good work. And as Director Elliott has stated, a lot of these issues occur when they are not there. So maybe holding them responsible is not exactly the right thing, but like I said, reaching out to others in the community to figure out how we can collectively deal with these problems, I think that's a good way to go. I also, recognize Director Gisborne's concerns about funding, but I think there may be some potential for changes in the way the grants are given. I think what we need to do is focus on what we do, focus less on what the municipality is taking care of, and just figure out what can we do around this table and do what is right for us at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Brander. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've been thinking about this one a lot and come to some of this, how we apply grants and things with new eyes. And I agree with some of the comments that have been made about how we can sort of target these initiatives a little bit better and maybe working on our services better. When I look at the list of what we're going to discuss today and what's under general grants and aid versus social, then we run into some lack of funding when we start talking about all of our applications. So I think that's what we're getting at. I want to take care of people. I think the people in my area and the region want to take care of people, and the increase, the demand is increasing. I wrote a bunch of notes. I'll try to be brief. I see at least a 5-year pattern of applying for, basically overhead cost funding. And again, this comes back to some of the points that have been made about the province properly funding the applications and which buckets they go into. When I look at the revenue statements for this application, the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction is a major contributor to this. So that's tax dollars. So, I understand what we're talking about, who's funding what. That's where it's coming from. Our policies, the board must not provide assistance to industrial, commercial, business undertakings. With $1.7 million in net assets, I mean, it appears to be a business in many ways, and maybe that's just my perspective, but it makes me think about those obligations. Again, we talked about the grant and aid, the lack of application to the city, and I actually appreciate the comments that were made and some of the avenues that we can explore there, and I encourage the city to do that. Social planning. Those applications are considered for enhanced social cohesion. That's the first bullet. This is consolidating social cohesion in a small group. So I think that part of what's happening is the social cohesion is lacking still, and education is part of that. But that objective needs to be considered when we're applying our grants. Addressing root causes of poverty. I think this does help. This type of funding does help in general for poverty reduction and harm reduction, contributing to the vitality and livability of our community. For whom though? So we've had some clear feedback that the vitality and livability is being affected by some of the activities that are happening there. Foster social inclusion. Again, my point earlier, social inclusion for a small group of the folks that are there. I think that it's creating barriers for social inclusion for others. And equity. Social equity, so many supports are in place. $50,000, we've been told by the presentation, is basically maintaining 1 day out of 3, as if I remember correctly, of services. The need is increasing. The question I kept coming back to, will the application of $50,000 help or hurt the situation on the street? I was pleased to see, and I think it's a major issue, that there's been a tangible positive reduction in ER costs and visits to our primary care at the hospital. And I know from working there, that's been a huge burden. And so if we can do anything to reduce that, that's on the positive side. I got to tell you, I went up and I sat and watched the CRC just so I could just kind of keep my eyes open and my ears open and see how things are going. And it was quite apparent over the couple of days that I did that there's some profound antisocial behavior that's occurring at certain times of the day. And be that as it may, I actually bumped into one of the staff at the tourism center as they opened. And I just asked, can I talk to you for a little bit? And Sandy, I appreciate your, last month you educating us on what your feedback from the committee, and it was profound. And, first of all, they were very appreciative that we were asking the question, that we're trying to get a good perspective. They really reinforced a lot of the negative things that are happening. And, they can't have a picnic table out front because people start shooting up and they start burning things and they leave debris. And the tourists, there's been conflict in they really laid it out what the negative impacts were. And, it was pretty sobering. There are services that are available from other agencies that do some of this work, but I know it's important when it's all in one spot. And I think we need to really be cognizant that the community groups, taxpayers, they feel like some of those obligations in the plan that you just referenced haven't been met or not well enough. And there's been 2 additional actions proposed. I think that does help because a presence is actually what kind of tones things down around there. So almost done. LIFT has suggested some future looking actions, and I think that we should do everything we can to support those, but it's incumbent upon them as the service provider to push through with that. So, the cost of the location of the center, I think, is poor right now. That's just my personal opinion, having our tourists come into our town and be confronted with even what I saw this morning. It's intimidating for people at a first start, regardless of the safety factor. So finally, I come back to the question I raised earlier. And I asked this of the people the neighbors and the staff there. If we don't support this, does it help or hurt? And in most people's feelings, it'll hurt, and it'll make the situation a little bit worse. And so I am reservedly prepared to support the motion, but I think there's a lot of work to do there. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lennox. I'll speak a few words and then recognize a second round, starting with Director Dowd. Prior to the establishment of the social planning service in late 2018, the CRC received grants via general grant and aid, including $25,150 in 2016, $30,150 in 2017, and $50,000 in 2018. In 2019, the social planning service was fully functional and established, and the grants to the for the CRC were shifted to the social planning service. Each year from 2019 to 2022, the CRC has been granted $50,000, although last year is a little bit mixed because we granted LIFT a combined grant. This seemed to make sense as the CRC provides a vital social service, as we've talked about, and I really concur with the comments from Director Lennox. I think this question of whether the funds we provide cause more harm than good or more good than harm, and I think that's a really good way to look at it. However, the shift of funding from general grants and aid to social planning had the side effect of shifting the costs to be entirely from the electoral areas, as has been discussed. The contribution from the electoral areas to social planning grants is approximately double the amount that those areas contribute to general grants and aid. So from a practical point of view, I think it makes sense in the future for this body to consider either shifting the application or the funding for the CRC back to general grant and aid, or finding some other mechanism to do that. I think we've heard some comments to that effect around the board, but that brings us back to where we are right now, which is right now, do we fund the CRC LIFT to support the CRC through the social planning service grant? And I supported this motion at the last Finance Committee meeting, and I think the information I've heard will lends me to support it again for some of the comments around the table. And I do believe, I really do have concerns about some of the major issues that have been raised. And I think LIFT has heard. I think they should pay attention, and they have heard us, and hopefully they will take action. And I think we need to
in the light. Sorry.
We need to hit the light. I think we need to, hopefully they will be able to show some positive results. And I think we need to follow up with this to make sure that the other effects aren't made worse. But I do think that providing the funding would be better given those concerns than not funding them. Thank you. Director Dowd.
Yeah, thanks. So much to say. So many items we're talking about now. But you know, the decision we're really making is whether or not to make a contribution of $50,000 to youth or to lift community services. And I'll say again that I support that. I think they need other things, that this $50,000 will make it affordable for them to continue doing valuable services that are saving lives in the community. Could the world be better? Yeah, it could. And it'd take more money from somewhere to make it better. If we decide not to pass this resolution, I think there is no question in the world that conditions at the Tourist Bureau and that in downtown Powell River and the Joyce Avenue area will get worse because there will be less services and less occupancy to do that. What is Lyft doing right now? In their communication that we just received in the last day or so, there's 2 new actions that they recorded along with telling us about what they actually do from day to day currently. They're going to build a new picnic area and signage, and I've seen the material parked in their parking lot actually that they're going to use to build a new outdoor seating area behind the CRTC or the CRC to encourage people not to loiter in alleys in front of the parking lot. That's a positive activity that isn't happening yet until as we speak, basically. They have a new initiative for a night caretaker from Monday to Friday, which is a new position starting June 30th, which is last week, 2023, to increase staff capacity after hours on weekends, which has potential to reduce conflict in the community. And after that, they talk about forward-looking proposed solutions requiring community partnerships and additional resources. And there's a long list of things that they could do if they had funding, and that the regional district could help them to find future funding for. Number 6 on the list is development of an emergency response team involving the RCMP and a clinical nurse that specializes in responding to mental health crises. These have been functional and useful in other places in British Columbia and are a positive solution. It's something that we could work with them on. I'm in favor of granting this $50,000 from the social planning service to do that. So having talked about that, we'll talk in more detail about the social planning service. In my understanding, the social planning service is a 3-way partnership, was conceived as a 3-way partnership between the city of Powell River, the Tla'amin Nation, and the regional district. The city of Powell River employed a social planner and got through the first few years of that to 2022. The social planner is no longer employed by the city of Powell River. That's the future of that position is under discussion. The contribution there of the regional district was to have members on a social planning advisory committee and to provide grant funding. So I think we should really look at that. And the regional district should sit down with the city of Powell River. Now, Councillor Elliott and I, we're municipal directors of the regional district. The regional district should sit down with the city of Powell River and the Tla'amin Nation and take a really good look at the social planning services and make a decision on how that's going to function. Could it be continue as a 3-way service? Should that be functioning entirely by the city of Powell River, or are there other ways to do that? Worth talking about, but it's not what we're talking about in this motion. And there's the grant and aid service. Is that providing a function that everybody likes and would like to support and would like to continue? Maybe we need to have a long discussion about that. But for the time being, I think it's to the better good of the community to provide this $50,000 in granting to Lyft, because if we don't do it, the conditions that everybody is telling us they're concerned about will not get better. It will only get worse.
Thank you, Director Dowd. So a second round for people. I see if anyone has further comments, I see Director Gisborne.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
Gisborne, yeah.
To the point that the provincial government doesn't fund the Community Resource Center. They do. It's outlined in their budget, and Director Lennox aptly pointed that out. $109,000 a year from the province to lift for operation of the CRC. This is a provincially funded operation. That's the first one. I'm hearing a lot of talk that there is support around this table to support this grant to lift for the operation of the CRC. But we also around this table have to take into account what's fair for the taxpayers. There's too many people I've gone to school with that have left this town because they can't afford to live here anymore. And when we make a decision at this table, we have to think about equity, what's fair. I don't think anyone at this table would think it would be fair to take $50,000 from, say, Area A to fund the CRC while the rest of the region doesn't pay. I think that would be very inappropriate. What we have before us is an application or a motion to take it from just the rural areas. And Director Dowd is correct. If LIFT gets this funding, then the downtown of Powell River will see a benefit. Well, then the downtown of Powell River can contribute. And we can do that through general grant and aid, as has been done in the past. And if a director wishes to make an amendment that it comes from general grant and aid, I'd be more likely to support it. But as it currently stands at this committee table, everyone votes one vote. When it goes to the board, it will be just the electoral area directors voting on this item. We gotta think about our balance, not just for LIFT, but for our entire community. There's a lot of folks out there that are getting hit really hard by the price of food and how much their property taxes are going up. And when we take money from them and give it to LIFT, it's not like we're just giving out free money. We're taking it from our taxpayers in our community, and it's not a small chunk of change. And it's not fair to just be taking it from the electoral areas. So, I'll make the motion. I move an amendment that it come from general grant and aid.
Okay, so an amendment's been put on the table. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Director McCormick. Okay, discussion on the amendment to fund this program to LIFT CRC from general grant and aid.
Yeah. Thank you for the second. I'll speak very briefly. Going around the table, I'm hearing support from municipal directors and some of the electoral area directors. So if this does provide a regional benefit and the directors that are in favor want to support LIFT, then it should come from general grant and aid. But we also then got to keep in mind that there's other community groups that can do a lot of good work with $50,000. So.
Director McCormick.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I really seconded this for discussion purposes, but I have a question, and that is regarding general grants and aid. Does the city contribute to general grants and aid?
Yes, they do.
Okay, all right. In that case, I think it really does make sense to do it from general grants and aid. Because I agree with Director Gisborne that it isn't right that the electoral areas carry the financial weight of this facility. I believe the city has an obligation to participate in some financial way. They were not able to grant the permissive tax exemption, okay? But there really is no other mechanism by which the city contributes to this facility. And so to me, it makes a lot more sense to fund it through general grants and aid. I am concerned that if we continue on, it will be an added burden to electoral areas without a lot of benefit. And so I would like to see the support for this be spread more evenly and include the city of Powell River as well as the electoral areas.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I can understand the desire to have it moved into general grants and aid, but the truth is this year we have more requests for the money than we have budget in the area. So I think all these sort of things should be taken into consideration in future budget deliberations, but It came initially from social planning service. I think for this year, at least, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it should stay in social planning.
I'll speak as well. I'll speak against this. I agree in general with the idea of reconsidering and reviewing how we fund CRC and our social planning service in general. But I think that needs to be done in the budget process. The challenge we have here is that we didn't do that in the budget process. We allocated the funds to the pots of money on the basis of what we've done in recent years. And so we have sufficient funds in social planning for this. In fact, more than sufficient. There was originally 115,000, although some of that's already been earmarked, but we have sufficient funds. In the general grants and aid, we have, I believe, $78,000 remaining. So if we funded 50, that would leave 28, and there's still a number of projects on this agenda that are being requested from general grants and aid, and that would not allow them to all pass major reductions. And so I think that for those reasons, I'm not in favor of this, even though I support the idea in general. I think we used to fund it from general grants and aid. I think finding a way that we all contribute makes sense. But I think right now we're trying to find a solution for this year. Director McCormick, did I see your hand up for a second time?
Thank you, Chair. No, I was going to ask a question, but in fact, it's been answered. So thank you.
Okay. Director Elliott.
So I'm actually not opposed to moving it to general grant and aid, but I also know that puts other projects in jeopardy that maybe not a good idea. So if we can't get support for it to be in the social planning envelope, I would not let it stay that way, and it would have impact my support for other projects in general grant and aid, which I in principle also support. But we can't fit everything in general grants and aid. So in my opinion, this motion, even though it makes sense for the reasons that were put forward, it just doesn't seem to allow us to approve all of the things that we feel are priorities this year. So I'm with Director Brandner in saying that maybe we discuss how to shift things for next year through the budgeting process, and we try to work together and approve the things we need to do this year with the structure that we have. Whether that makes sense to the area directors or not is entirely up to them, but I'm not going to move forward without some sort of solution for lift. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elliott. And I saw Director Doubt raise a yellow piece of paper, so thank you for getting my attention. The floor is yours.
Thanks. So I'm not in favor of this motion. I think there is plenty of opportunity to discuss the social planning service and the budget and the social planning service, and the social planning grants collection that we do, and the grants in aid future, and how the definitions of the grants in aid work, all of those things. And that's something we should spend considerable time talking about in the budget process. I think when I look at today's agenda, there is sufficient funding in the different grant services to cover all of the business that's on our agenda and to fund those groups because they're all deserving groups. I think we could do this, but I don't think this amendment will help us get to a solution.
Thank you, Director Doubt. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the recommendations that are coming, there's 3 recommendations for grants from social planning, which total, if they were all approved, $17,445. So looking at that calculation, it does appear that there is enough money in the general grants and aid to take the $50,000 from that source and still, should we so choose, approve the other recommendations. So I believe there is sufficient funding. I believe it's a much more equitable way to fund a service that I agree benefits the whole region. I agree that it's a valuable service, but I don't believe it should fall to the backs of the electoral area taxpayer to fund the full meal deal. So that's why I support moving it to general grants and aid. I think that's a much fairer way. And there is money in the fund to do it.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Corporate Officer, may I ask for clarification on the, and maybe this is for Mr. Cohenhoven, on this source of the targeted source of funds for the remaining items on our agenda. Are they not all from general grants and aid? Director, Corporate Officer?
Or yes, thank you through the chair. My understanding is that there's 3 items on here that are to come from general grants and aid, and ORUG was originally proposed to come from general grant and aid as well. So yes.
Thank you. Okay, so is there any further discussion on the Director Gisborne? This is on the amendment.
Yes, this is on the amendment. So this isn't the main motion. This isn't about whether or not we actually fund LIFT. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is, do we fund LIFT through a more fair and equitable grant source of funding, which is general grant and aid. That's what we're voting on. That's the amendment. If the will of the committee is to vote down this motion, then there are other options to fund LIFT. Area A has $15,000 in their electoral area grant and aid. Area C has $8,000 that we could pull from. There's a little bit left on Texada, but not much. There's even some money in economic development. But taking money from those electoral areas, it's still the same problem. The amendment that is before us today is, do we choose to fund through a fair and equitable manner? The question isn't whether or not we even fund them. Like, I can be opposed to funding LIFT, but I can still vote in favor of this amendment because this is about where the money comes from. Yes, it is true. There isn't enough money in general grant and aid to fund everything that we want. We ran into that issue last month, that we've got all of these requests and our grant intake occurs after we pass the budget. So we've set the limit, and now we got to figure out who's going to get a piece of the pie. And I also need to remind the assembly that there's another grant intake that's going to be coming up later this year. So there might be another $50,000 request from another organization that we want to fund. Are we going to find ourselves in that position of, well, area A has 15, area C has 8, and then we just start taking it from where we can? And I don't think that's fair or equitable. We divvy up general grant and aid to where it needs to go for where there's a regional benefit. That's the purpose. And if we got to cut back on ORUG, which we have done in the past, because there wasn't enough money in general grant and aid, if we also have to cut back the amount to LIFT because we don't have enough, then we can do that too. But that would be a separate amendment. The motion before us is very simple, very simply put. Do we fund LIFT through something that is regional and fair, and equitable? And if we vote against it, we're saying is no, the electoral areas only pay. So I'm in favor of this amendment.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, maybe we can get to some voting here. So I'll call the question on the amendment. This is to change the grant source from the main motion, to change it from social planning to general grants and aid. Is that clear for everyone? Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor of that amendment? All those opposed? Director Elliott, were you opposed? You put your hand down. So all opposed.
Sorry, I'll clarify my vote. My hand was in the positive. I was trying to be in favor.
You're in favor. Okay, so opposed was Director Brander, Director Dowd, and Director Fall. So the amendment passes. Okay, so now we're on the amended motion, which is to fund $50,000 from LIFT from general grant and aid. Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. With that amendment, I'm feeling definitely more positive about supporting the recommendation. In spite of the initiatives that are on the list that LIP provided, Director Lennox still witnessed problems during the day today, which continue in spite of these things. Now, maybe the picnic area at the back will help people congregate in the rear. I'm willing to give it a chance. But I also feel that unless LIFT can get its street order and disorder together so that we don't a year from now, see the problems that we're currently seeing. I can support it this year, but I don't think I could support it in the future unless they make every possible effort to end the crime and disruption to the neighboring community. So I guess having said all that, I am supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, I'll speak and then I'll recognize Director Gisborne. So now I'm feeling a little disconcerted because we have after this, so this motion is for $50,000 out of $78,000 from general grant and aid. That would leave $28,000 to potentially support ORUG, the 2 Lesquiti applications, and the Therapeutic Riding Association. There simply isn't enough money. And my concern is that the Lesquiti applications will be pushed to the wayside. And I have a question, but I think I know the answer to it. But that's my concern. My concern is that unless we entertain and support a reduced amount from a significantly reduced amount to allow those Lesquiti applications to go through, I will find this incredibly unfair to Lesquiti because we could have funded this. We had the money, we budgeted the amount, and then now we're putting ourselves in a situation where we maybe don't have the money. And when I get to the Lesquiti applications, I will have comments on how putting the Lesquiti applications last means that Lesquiti is going to be stuck with whatever crumbs are left over after we deliberate here. And so I find that not very fair. And I'll talk about it more later. But first, my question, and the question for the corporate officer is, out of the 4 applications or applicants following this motion, and this relates to the motion because it relates to what else we can do, is there any opportunity for any of them to fit into any of the other, into the social planning grant? Well, I guess the social planning grant. Would any of those 4, ORUG, the LCA, layered history, the LINK, landowner stewardship, and the therapeutic riding, would any of those 4 fit into the terms of social planning grants?
If I may, Chair, I don't actually have the social planning service bylaw open right now. Maybe Jason Cowenhoven might know if those would fit within, but it may take some research.
Okay, Mr. Cowenhoven.
Thank you, through the chair. When we first put these scenarios together, we looked at if any of these would fit into social planning, and in my discussions with other staff, these grants didn't quite fit the criteria. The initiatives were more related to heritage conservation or recreation and land stewardship, and not as much social planning activity. So my current suggestion is no, they would not fit into social planning.
Thank you for that. So Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Your question about whether something fits in social planning or not is a really good question. And I think that at the end of the day, the ultimate decision lies with the board. And I'm taking a look at our list, and there is one item that I'm not going to get into, which is 5.5. I think that's a social planning thing, but I'm going to avoid that because Director Elliott's here, so we're not going to get into that discussion so that we don't have to keep kicking her out of the room. But my question for Mr. Cowenhoven is, what is the current amount of general grant and aids? Because I know that we did allocate some at our last month's meeting, and I'm just trying to figure out what could be an equitable amount. So I'm just curious. Thank you.
Mr. Cowenhoven, do you have that figure for us?
Sorry, just a clarifying question, Chair. We're just looking for the balance available.
The balance available right now at the start of this meeting.
Okay, so that is on page 3 of the current LIFT report. There's $78,000 in the general grants and aid, $19,738 in area A, $5,130 in area B, $10,679 in area C, $5,785 in area D. There is $6,667 in the economic development service and $61,779 in social planning.
Okay, thank you. Director McCormick.
Thank you. It seems to me that the Therapeutic Riding Association would qualify for social planning. And I'm only saying that because we're not voting on it right now, so it doesn't compromise Director Elliott. But yeah, I do think that could come from social planning. So there is that option for us when we get there.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on this item? Director Lennox?
Nope.
And then, Director Doe. Director Doe. Sorry, you got the yellow paper.
I'm trying to get your attention, Jeff.
Thank you for that.
But this is why I voted against the previous motion. Okay? Because I read the reports from the previous recommendations from staff about the grant allocations. And I read the reports about the status where we are today. And when I came to the meeting, I was fairly satisfied that we could fit in all of the applications that we're looking at today in the places that are recommended by staff successfully. There would be limited opportunity for future applications later in the year, but all of these could be approved in one easy go. And now we're going to have to make decisions on all of the ones after 9.1 because there is going to be a limited amount of funds in the grant and aid service. That's where the board has just put itself. I regret that we're here, but those decisions are going to have to be made somehow. So I would rather pay attention to voting on the issue that is before us, if we can. We can do one at a time and try to get through it without trying to resolve all of the issues on the whole table without any further discussions. I'd just like to get to the motion on 5.1 and then we can try to sort out the rest of it.
Okay, thank you, Director Dowd and then Director Elliott. Sorry, Director Gisborne and then Director Elliott.
I have a question for Mr. Cohenhoven, and this is like a bit more of a hypothetical in terms of funding, and I want to make sure to see if my math would be okay. 30,000 to lift, 30,000 for ORUG, 10,000 for the Lasqueti Community Association, the 2,445 for the Conservancy, and 5,000 for therapeutic riding. When I crunched the numbers, that came in just under the 78,000. Is that correct?
Mr. Cohenhoven, is the math add up?
The calculator.
Thank you, Chair. If the proposal is that all of those would come from the general grants and aid service, then that would total $77,445, which does fit within the current 78,000 available.
Okay. I'll let the other directors speak, but I have a proposed amendment, but other people had their hands up, so.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you. I also regret that we're here, but I wasn't prepared to go forward with a recommendation from this committee that would fail that was clearly going to fail when we get to the decision point at the board. Since I have no vote in the one area, and I would have to trust the rest of the board to be moving forward with approving that recommendation, I didn't feel like it was a safe recommendation from the board without commitment from the board, the area directors that they were on board with this plan. And so I didn't hear enough support for the original motion to help me feel comfortable in that area. So I'm in favor of this motion. And I do realize it puts us in a predicament. And I'm hoping we can resolve that as a board. The handling things one item at a time, the way we do things in a board discussion, often makes it difficult for us to come to a consensus on how we best meet all the needs. And it is a little bit awkward and clunky, and I regret that a lot. But I have made my position fairly clear that if we're not going to move forward with funding LIFT, which I think is best for all of us in this greater community, that I would support it through general grants and aid. I don't want to make that other projects at a disadvantage because that doesn't feel good to me, but neither does moving forward with a recommendation from this committee to the board that won't pass when I don't have a vote. That doesn't feel good to me either. And so we're in this position because of who has votes on which areas, and the support for the overall package would have to be a consensus among us all. So unless we're willing to step back from making motions immediately all the time and have a consensus building conversation, this is where we're going to land every time. And it's partly to do with our process. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elliott. Now I have a comment. I have Director Brander, and then actually I have a motion I want to make. But Director Brander, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really quite distressed as to where we are right now, because the way I saw it going forward, I thought everything would be funded nice and neatly. And I don't share the fear that Director Elliott has that the money for LIFT wouldn't pass at the board level. I felt that there was a good chance of it happening. And the way we're going down the road right now is essentially guaranteeing that some of the other projects won't be funded, or at least to the level that they are requesting. I thought we had a pretty straightforward plan laid out in front of us based on the motion that was initially made without the amendment. But this amendment has thrown everything up in the air, and I honestly don't know how to deal with this now. It's a real challenge. I'm hoping that the chair can come up with a motion that sets things straight for us.
Thank you. And then the okay, Director Dowd, and then
we have a motion on the floor.
Yeah, I understand.
Maybe the right way to go about it is to vote on the motion on the floor, and then if you want to see if there's other motions, you could do that after we vote on the one that's on the floor.
Okay, thank you for your comments. But my motion actually is to postpone. I want to move, and the corporate officer will correct me if I'm out of order. I'd like to move to postpone the motion on the table until after item 5.5 in the agenda.
You can vote. Thank you, through the chair. You can postpone to a certain point in time.
Okay, and so if I get a seconder, I'll explain why that may help us. Director Lennox, thank you. And I'll speak to that. The reason why is because we heard from Director Gisborne some ideas about 30,000. Well, that's just speculating on what else we might do with ORUG and the other ones. We don't know, so if we do this, then that actually brings us back to the LIFT, and then we can see where we can get the money from, whether there's sufficient in general grant and aid or a mixture of general grant and aid and social planning. Maybe that might work too, because I believe there's quite a bit of support around the table to fund LIFT to their full request. Maybe not, but some funding, and we can see where that's at. So I think that would help us. We can deal with the other 4 items and then come back to this. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I got a quick question. Postponement is usually till the next meeting. I think the procedure bylaw would be that we table this item until we handle the other items. And I was going to also request that if this motion passes, can we have a 5-minute bio break?
Yes. So I believe that, and the corporate officer will call on, but the procedure bylaw says you can postpone to a certain time. So corporate officer, could you clarify what the appropriate motion would be?
Either way, sometimes you might want to table something so you can deal with something that's more urgent, or you can postpone to a certain time. I think either one would work in this situation. So whatever this assembly is comfortable with.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it as is because the tabling talks about urgency, and I think it's not that this is urgent. It's just procedurally it would be easier to deal with first these other items and then that item. Okay, any other discussion on postponing this until after 5.5? Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I think that I'm okay with dealing with it later, and we're reminding the board that we're making recommendations to the board. If we end up at the board in a situation where delay, postponing puts us backwards in supporting LIFT, that I may not support motions at the board level that don't include LIFT as the bigger package. And so I'm perfectly prepared to talk about it later, but I'm just letting people know I'm supporting funding LIFT at this point in time, and our overall package needs to include that. And it has to, for me to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Dowd.
I'm not in favor of postponing this. Okay, we are in a postponed discussion now. We postponed it from the last finance committee. We postponed it from the board meeting, and now we're dealing with it again. We all know the agenda. We all know that there's limited. We know that changes have been made today by the amendment. We know what's coming next on the agenda. I think we might as well deal with them one at a time and do the best we can. Yeah, I agree. I am in the same position as Director Elliott. I want to make sure that that funding request for LIFT is granted one way or the other, whether we do it now or whether we do it later. That's going to be what my vote is based on. Why don't we do it now? And then we can start going through the other 4 items that we have and try to figure it out from the place where we're at. And we have another meeting that starts at 4:30, so.
Thank you. So is there any further discussion on the motion to postpone until later in the meeting? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor postponing, and all those opposed? 1 opposed. Director Dowd. Thank you. I think we need a 5-minute bio break, so till 2:15 or so.
Insane.
Did you want to move Roger out?
And
Horace. Okay, will do.
Good to go.
You go? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going on to 5.2, which is ORUG. And if I understand, the process would be the same as last time, the
No.
corporate officer?
If I could just please say one thing, that was a bit of a complicated motion. A motion to reconsider is not out of order in this situation. However, when you can get the desired result with a less complicated motion, you should potentially take that path. And I'm just going to say that at committee level, the main motion was to provide 17,000, but we also considered providing 56,543, 23,000, 36,000. So we did consider a lot of different things. It might be the best path forward to just introduce a new main motion to reconsider a grant application if people are okay with that.
Okay, Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I hope we're following all the procedures properly, but I'd like to make a motion. I think we've got it on screen. Is that right?
Sorry.
Motion. So I'm making a motion that the committee recommend to the board approve a grant of 23,000 to River Outdoor Recreational User Group Trail Society for annual trail maintenance for the General Grants and Aid Service, and that the board will both propose an additional 3-year funding commitment in the General Grant and Aid at the rate of 23,000 to the same group.
Okay, thank you. Would someone like to second that? Director Gisborne, are you seconding? Or Director Dowd? Okay, so Director Elliott. Everyone's got their hand up. Okay, so Director. Why don't we go around the table, because I think everyone wants to speak. So Director Brander first, since he made the motion.
Thanks, Chair. As I've said before, I'm a big supporter of the organizations that fall under ORUG. I've built trails, I've cleared roads, I've provided literally hundreds of signs for these organizations. And I did get a chance to speak to Roger Artiga as the president of ORUG over the weekend. And he stated that even if they receive no funding, the work is still going to continue, but that any financial support that we provide them with is greatly appreciated. The budget they put together, it encompasses the estimated amount of time and that the volunteers put in and the expenditures that they may see in this coming year. But the reality is they can only do as much as their volunteer base allows. So after speaking with him, I genuinely feel that $23,000 is a responsible amount to commit to the group. ORUG will actually be receiving more than 50% more than they did the previous year. And if they accept our proposal, it'll mean consistent funding at this increased rate, which will allow them to continue the good work they do and plan for future projects. Last year, as I mentioned, we gave 15,000, or that was actually 27,000 less than they had requested, and yet their bank balance after outstanding liabilities went up by almost $2,000. So they're responsible with their spending, and I think a 50% increase will allow them to think bigger. I think it's wise of us to encourage gradual expansion and to invest in something that is sustainable, not just in the way of funding, but based on how many volunteers are available to do the work. This proposal will do it.
Thank you. Director Dowd, we'll just go around the table because I think everyone has their hand up. Director Dowd.
Okay, so now that's 23,000 this year. And for several years to come, we're going to make it ahead of time to meet those grants. With this motion, according to my math, and perhaps staff can follow what I'm saying here, is that according to the report in the package, we started with $78,000 available in grants and aid. We have had a discussion, and I've made my position clear on the 50.
Recording in progress.
We've had a discussion, and I've made my position clear about $50,000 for lift, which would bring us down to $28,000 available. 23,000 to ORUG, which is on the table now, would reduce that to $5,000 available. And the next items, the 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5 add up to $17,000. So somehow we will have to whittle that down to 5,000 if we're going to fit everything in. Yeah, I have a concern about that. I'm going to listen to what other people around the table say, as long as they realize that we're going to have to find a way to split this up and to reduce some of these grants somewhere.
Thank you, Director Dow. Director Lennox, did you have your hand up?
No, I prefer to listen to this.
You prefer to listen. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair Paul. This motion before us is a two-part motion, and one is to provide grant funding for this year. However, the second part of this motion is to enter into like a long-term funding agreement. And I think that's significantly different than what's on the agenda, which is to consider grant funding for this year. A multi-year funding agreement is something which, yes, is the purview of the Finance Committee, but it hasn't been put on the agenda. So I would almost suggest that it's out of order. Looking at the grant funding from General Grant and Aid, one of the comments that Director Elliott said earlier was about our process kind of gumming us up. And I completely agree with that, because we keep coming back to the issue of, well, how much money is available in General Grant and Aid and where can we divvy it? So it's almost one of those cases where Ellie Mina talks about how having a discussion first and then having the motion would actually probably save us a lot of headache, or we could have taken an alternative of a resolution that says, from the General Grant and Aid, we allocate this much to certain groups, and then we could discuss all of it and have amendments. Myself and how I feel about this particular motion, just the first part, I don't even really want to discuss the multi-year funding agreement because there's nothing else. Like, that's not something that was on the agenda. But the amount, what we've been able to get from our staff is that if we were to provide all the funding being requested from 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5, that would leave roughly $60,000 left over to split between ORUG and LIFT. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now, is if we deal with all the other ones, there will be $60,000 left over to split between ORUG and LIFT. Myself and how I feel about it is ORUG has been underfunded for a long time. This year, they've been asking for $58,000. I think, was it 2019? I don't have the numbers in front of me. We actually gave them 20-something thousand. Like, so even this motion right now is kind of on par with what we were doing years ago. I still don't think it's enough. I myself would be happy with $40,000 to LIFT. Sorry, $40,000 to ORUG. That leaves $20,000 left over for LIFT, because I would rather see these organizations get something rather than nothing. But when it comes to ORUG, we have to take into account that they have been underfunded by us for a very long time with these requests. We also have to take into account that Lasqueti Island has kind of fallen back and been getting the crumbs from General Grant and Aid for a long time. So I don't want to see Lasqueti Island drop off. But that being said, I would rather see either LIFT and ORUG at the same level of funding. But personally, I would like to see ORUG higher because we've underfunded them for so long. So I'm not sure what your ruling is on the second half of the amendment, whether it's in order or not. But after it goes around the table, I'd be happy to put an amendment forward for $40,000 for ORUG. And then when we get to lift, I would happily make a motion for 20,000. And then that way we're actually supporting everyone. That's my thoughts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. I'll just ask the corporate officer, is the motion in order? The second part of the motion.
I can't see a reason why we wouldn't be able to consider it, because the agenda says reconsideration of Powell River Outdoor Leisure Group Trail Society Financial Assistance Grant application. So they are asking for money. I get it. It is providing them money for more than they've asked, but it would, I think it would be up to the membership to decide if they feel like it's in order.
Okay, thank you. It's in order in my opinion. Okay, it's going around the table. So I think Director McCormick and then Director Elliott, and then I'll speak.
Thank you. Question of clarification. What is the motion that is on the table right now? Is it 23,000 for this year, or is it 23,000 plus a multi-year agreement?
Corporate officer.
If I can, through the chair, it is to provide 23,000 this year, and then to enter into and propose an additional 3-year funding commitment from the General Grants and Aid Service for annual trail maintenance at the rate of 23,000 per year.
Okay, so the issue of proposing a multi-year agreement, is that something we're voting on with this motion? Because I definitely could support the 23,000 for this year, but I'm a little concerned about committing a multi-year, because we do need to have really a thorough discussion about grants and how, you know, how they're divvied up, how the money, where the money comes from, etc. So I'd like to support the motion for this year. The 23 is okay, but I'm not sure about the rest of it. Chair.
CAO has his hand up for clarification, and then I'll go to Director.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what you need to focus on, obviously, is the 23,000 for this year, and then the operating word in the second part of the motion is propose. So that would mean to offer to them that agreement. And it would then wait in the waiting, you know, in the aisles until they came back and said yes or no. So you're not committing to it. You're actually just committing to offering them an agreement for the future years. They might say no, they might say yes, but those are the two dynamics that you need to focus on.
So
Chair, Director McCormick, you can.
Yeah, if I may request that we split those two recommendations into 1 and 2. And so if 1 is the one that's on the table now for the 23,000, yeah, I can support that.
Okay, and it was done. Director Elliott.
If it was a motion to split the motion into 2, I would second that.
Well, no, there's no motion needed. It's it just happens.
It just
happens. So we're on the. They've both been moved and seconded, but we'll discuss and vote on the first one, and then we'll discuss and vote on the second one.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to share that I did, because I was very supportive of ORUG, still am. I took the time to speak with the president, Roger, I can't remember his last name. I'm bad at names. Yeah.
Artigas.
Yeah. He indicated that he would be really happy with a multi-year agreement, that would be so much you know, better for planning and helping them figure out what they could do on a multi-year basis. And, you know, it's very difficult to plan the kind of sustainable activities you need for such a large trail network and all the various organizations on a year-by-year basis, particularly as our decisions come so late in the season. So, on the second one, I would be happy there. And the amount he seemed pretty happy with the 23,000 amount. And it allows us to spread our money over a little bit. You know, if we go higher, that, you know, shackles our ability to support other parts. He said he would feel very supported with that amount and very happy. And so I am happy to support this motion.
Thank you, Director Elliott. And I'll speak and see if anyone else wants to say something after. And I support this motion. We've been around this a lot. We went back and forth on a number of items, and I'm really happy to hear that there's been some discussion with ORUG. I think that in my view, groups that apply annually, especially for large amounts, should be considered for longer term agreements of some kind, either via a grant service, the grant and aid service, or through a new contribution service. This is what occurred with the museum, which received substantial grants from 2013 to 2017 and is now funded via its own service. In 2019, we set up a multi-year agreement with the Powell River Community Services.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
We're not on the second motion.
You're quite correct, but I'll just complete my thought. It relates to the first one because the amount is the same in both, so thank you. I'll go back to my sentence. In 2019, we set up a multi-year agreement with the Powell River Community Services Association, funded from social planning. Longer-term agreements with groups that are supported annually give stability and certainty to all parties. And I think 23,000 is a good amount to start with. And we heard that a report would come back to us. I think it makes sense to fund this amount. And this could be considered, I think, for other groups as well. But I support the motion of 23,000 for ORUG coming from general grants and aid. So second round. So does anyone want to talk further? So Director Dowd and then Director Gisborne.
Yeah. On the strength of Director Elliott's negotiations with ORUG and the fact that the statements being made is they'll be thoroughly happy with $23,000 this year, I will support this motion. But taking into account what I said previously, that 78 minus 50 minus 23 leaves $5,000 left available in the grants in aid. And as far as the ongoing process, I've already said that we should have a deep and detailed discussion about the grants in aid process for next year continuing. So there may or may not be the similar grants in aid. So when we talk about the next one, we'll talk about that on its own merit.
Thank you, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I'm just talking about this year, not talking about multi-year funding agreements. Motion on the table is this year's grant. I got an issue about process. I've been involved in some nonprofits. I'm currently the president of one. One of the issues when you are president of an organization is sometimes folks will talk to you and they want to get a commitment from your organization. And my response has always been, I don't speak for the whole organization. It's up to the board. It's up to the committees. It's up to the leadership of the organization. I thank the directors for reaching out to Roger to talk about what would be best for ORUG. But I think what's appropriate is to communicate with their entire board and find out what works for their whole organization. And also to find out for this board what works for our organization. They have put in a request from their organization for $58,000. Sure, if I was to go and talk to the head of a nonprofit and I said, look, you've asked for $60,000, would you take 5? Of course they'll say yes. It's essentially free money to them, to the nonprofit. And absolutely they would be polite to accept whatever it is we're offering. I find it appropriate for us to determine how much the grant is this year based on the information that is provided to us in writing in their application. That's the information that the entire board has before them. We don't have a board in front of us. We don't have Roger in front of us to ask him questions. We have the paperwork that they submitted. ORUG also does the job of being an umbrella organization, which means that they represent other groups. One of the things you might have noticed is that the amount of groups that they have been representing has been going down. I've been hearing in the community that nonprofit groups and trail fixer-uppers don't feel supported. The amount that we're proposing today, I think, is still lowballing. it's still too low. If we offer them 40,000, it shows them that we're committed to supporting them. That leaves all the money that's needed for all the other applications with $20,000 left over to lift. I'll propose an amendment. Can it be amended? The first motion, because that's what we're talking about, to be $40,000.
An amendment put forward to change 23,000 to 40,000. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seeing none, we will carry on back with the main motion, 23,000. Director Gisborne. Now, I'd like to point out, my understanding is that the limits of debate are not extended by splitting a question, so we need to keep our focus on the first part, and then we'll have a round on the second part. But okay, Director Gisborne.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 23,000 is too low. Why is it that an organization like Lyft can come and ask for 50 and we'll go, we got to give them 50. And then ORUG asks for 58 and we go, nah. I think it's insulting to them. I don't support this motion.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any further debate on the motion to support 23,000 from general grants and aid to ORUG, the first part? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? One opposed. Director Gisborne passes. Okay, so we're on the second part of the motion, which is to maybe, corporate officer, could you pop that back up for a moment so we can refresh our memories of what the exact word was?
Yes.
Is to propose.
Sorry, it's here. It's the second part here. I haven't put it in it.
Thank you. And before we go to debate, I'd just like to ask for clarification on what the CAO said. If I understood correctly, if this went out, they'd be the QRD would reach out to ORUG, and if they were accepting of this, then something would come back to the board sometime in the future meetings to discuss this arrangement, and we would have a decision point there. Is that correct? Yes,
Through the chair, correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, so discussion on that part of the Director Brander. I see everyone on the left, so I'm going to go down the line again. Director Brander.
I'll be quick. Thanks, Chair. I just see this as a proposal. I don't see this as committing ourselves to anything. I just see it, this is a group that comes back to us consistently. This would not only save them time in trying to, in applying each year, it would save staff time every year in having to deal with it, and it would also give them consistent funding so they can plan for future operations. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dowd.
Yeah, so, this is right now, we'll call it pie in the sky. It's a proposal for a future that might be, and I would suggest that the proposal doesn't make sense to even talk about, frankly, before we've had the detailed discussion about the future budgets for the grant services to see if there is 23,000 a year in the grant and aid budget going forward. So, we could mark the proposal down, but I think it's a proposal that has to be looked at carefully through the appropriate chain of events in budgeting and all of that stuff. And there's no promises.
Thank you. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree. This particular subject reflects upon this greater question I have and that we've all brought up about how do we actually budget appropriately and forward looking, not kind of reactively like we're doing. And, I think that in my recollection, in the short time I've been involved, we've had several of these requests for multi-year agreements. And so I think it needs to be looked at holistically in the broader budget context so that we're thinking of everyone, not just in isolation. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment, and I'll recognize Director Gisborne, and that is that doing this kind of process or decision isn't unprecedented. We last September, I believe, we made a decision for Tinches, the Texada Island Nonprofit Social Housing Association. Is that close enough? And we didn't have enough money. That was from social planning. We didn't have enough money. We granted 5,000, which wasn't full request, and then we committed to 20,000 from this year, which is built into our social planning grants as of now. So we can do this. We have done that. We did that in committee, as we've done now, to board as a recommendation and adopted it. So I think this is for multi-year proposals that come to us each year. I think it makes sense for us to start thinking longer term to provide stability, to make our decision process a little bit more efficient, and stability for the taxpayer. I think getting terms of reference of how the money can be spent. We've had discussions about how these groups spend money, different groups. So I think starting to think about multi-year agreements, we've already started with some groups, and I think this is one more example, and it is just a proposal. So I look forward to seeing something come back to us. Director Gisborne. And then
yeah, thank you, Chair. I got a bit of an issue here. Our Finance Committee agenda, the whole thing, with the exception of the report that we still haven't gotten to, is the result of our board meeting where we postponed all these general grant and aids back to the Finance Committee meeting. I believe that occurred because at our board meeting, there was a motion that was proposed about general grant and aid and ORUG, and it was deemed at the board to be out of order because that specific motion wasn't on the agenda. General grant and aid was, but it was ruled as out of order. Now here we are at a meeting. This motion is not a one-year grant. This motion is not on the agenda. And yet it's in order. Why isn't this being postponed?
It's a recommendation, Director Gisborne.
It's not a recommendation from staff. It's not a recommendation on the agenda.
But it would be a recommendation from the committee.
This was made on the floor, and I'm wondering, why is it that Director Doubt's motion is ruled out of order at the board, but yet this one's fine? I find that to just, it's not procedurally right.
Is there any further debate on this item, which is the one that we saw a moment ago on our screen, Director McCormick?
Thank you. Okay, I support a multi-year agreement. It makes sense for everybody for many reasons. Stability being the most important. But I'm not sure of the dollar number. So once again, if I might ask the corporate officer to read out exactly the wording of what it is we're voting on.
Yes, that the board proposed an additional 3-year funding commitment from the General Grant and Aid Service for annual training and maintenance at the rate of $3,000 per year to the Powell River outdoor recreation users trail society.
Okay, thank you. I support a multi-year agreement. I'm not sure of the dollar figure and what it should be, because I strongly agree with Director Doubt that we need to have a conversation about how our granting process works, how they're funded and what they're used for, so that there's a much clearer understanding of how it all comes together. So, you know, I support the concept of a multi-year agreement, but I don't propose, I don't support making a defined proposal to them right now until we've had that more detailed conversation. So I guess that means I'm against the recommendation, because I don't believe I can support a dollar figure right now.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Is there any further debate on this item? Seeing Director Elliott, sorry, I saw you hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Director Elliott. I think it was on the list and you've forgotten about me, but anyway.
Sorry about that.
I do support someone answering the procedural question that our esteemed Director Gisborne brought forward. But having said all of that, I wanted to say that I love the idea of multi-year agreements for organizations that require funding every year to support their operations. That would actually include LIFT as well. It would be good if we had a funding stream that was dedicated to multi-year supports for those folks who would benefit from that. And that is a conversation about how we structure our budgets and so forth. I do support multi-year agreements for ORUG. Whether we are structurally set up to decide that rate this minute today is another thing. So this is a committee where we make recommendations to the board, and the board can kick that around as well. My recommendation would be that, yes, we do enter into multi-year agreements with folks that need it. However, we also need to decide if we require some sort of different structure in order to support that or not. Because I don't know the answer to that. And because I don't know the answer to that, that makes it a little bit hard. I think it's a brilliant idea. Love it. What we need now is maybe a report back from staff to let us know for implementing multi-year agreements. Is that different than annual grants? If so, do we require better contribution agreement structure around that and for deliverables, and what are, keeping track of our finances and where it's going? And what if things go sideways and organizations are not delivering what we expected, and how do we track those commitments? And I don't think it's a good idea to pretend we're not making a commitment if we decide to move forward with a proposal, because you don't offer people stuff and then pull it back later. That's not a good way to do business. So we should have ducks in order a little bit before that proposal goes out. And so I'm wondering if what we should be recommending is staff come back with a report for if we did authorize a proposal going to ORUG, how does that work, and whether we need to know anything in order to make that recommendation. I don't know.
Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. If it's appropriate procedurally, I'd like to make a motion to postpone this until we are in budget deliberations and discuss it at a later date.
I'll second that.
Okay, so there's the motion now on the table is discussion on postponing this until budget deliberations start, which would give time for staff to think about it. Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I think it is appropriate to postpone. I'd be fine to discuss it at next month's Finance Committee meeting. But if the Assembly does want it to go to budget deliberations, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Director Dowd.
Yeah, was there a seconder for that motion?
Yes, there was.
Just thought I might have missed it. I'm actually in favor of the entire motion, the way it's been stated, to postpone it to budget deliberations. I've seen a potential schedule. I think it's later on this agenda for when that is. And I think if we're going to make any serious proposals, that they need to be backed up with the budget. I agree with what Director Elliott is saying. You just don't make a proposal without thinking about what it means and making sure you have the wherewithal to do it. And the proper place to do that is in budget consideration. So I would be in favor of this proposal.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further debate on the item the motion to postpone this item until budget deliberations? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried unanimously. Okay. Through one of them at least. Partly. Okay, item 5.3, which is the Lesquiti Community Association Financial Assistant Grant Application, which was referred from the regional board meeting. I'll move I guess it has to be, sorry, Director Brander, right? It has to be reconsidered.
Thanks, Chair. I have a motion I'd like to make considering this one, that the committee recommend to the board that the board approve a grant of $10,000 to Lesquiti Community Association for the Layered Histories Cultural Heritage Project from the Social Planning Service.
Seconder for that. Director Lennox, thank you.
Okay. And I'd like to.
Yeah, yes, recognize yourself. I'd like to speak, and then Director Gisborne.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I respect what the staff has said, that they felt that this grant would fall more cleanly under the general grants and aid, but I have the bylaw to establish a social planning service pulled up in front of me here, and I just want to read off one section to you. The Catholic Regional District may undertake and carry out a cause to be carried out, all things necessary or convenient to provide the service established under Section 1, including without limiting the generality of the foregoing, providing support, research, analysis, advocacy, policy development, and facilitation for community needs and interests in social, cultural, economic, and environmental affairs within community populations, including but not limited to children and youth, seniors or immigrants, and and addressing challenges for community well-being such as poverty, homelessness, food security, housing, multiculturalism, physical and mental health, isolation, social inclusion, transportation, and addiction. So in there, I see multiculturalism, I see social, I see cultural. And I think it is my opinion that because of those items included in the bylaw that we would justify placing this grant under the social planning service.
Thank you. Well, I'll let others speak first, then I'll speak. So Director Gisborne, then Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. This item has been discussed at last month's Finance Committee and at the board. And Director Fall has made some very convincing points. For the last 10 to 20 years, Lesquiti has been paying into general grants and aid, and they have been getting the crumbs from general grants and aid. The motion before us is to have it come and be the difference made up from the other electoral areas. That doesn't address the issue that we've been talking about for the last month and a half. The issue is paying their fair share, is dealing with that inequity issue. The original proposal put forward by Director Fall was that it come from general grants and aid. That is the grant silo that has been underfunding Lesquiti for, in my opinion, decades. The social planning service should not be used to deal with that imbalance. I will not support this resolution coming from social planning. And if anything, I put forward a notice of motion that the committee recommends to the board that the board consider an informal service review for the social planning service and request a report from staff outlining the process for an informal review and a statutory review of the social planning service. I'll send that off to the corporate officer. We can deal with that later. But the motion as it is right now is that social planning makes up the difference, as in the electoral areas. The intent for it to come from general grant and aid is for it to come from general grant and aid. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So I was moved by Director Fall's presentation on the benefit to the entire region. And that benefit was mainly linked to efforts around reconciliation. Reconciliation is cultural in nature and absolutely of social benefit and does fit within social action. Many of the reconciliation efforts that the province makes are in the area of social action, or what we call that envelope. If you're looking at it as simply a cultural thing, which the original recommendation from staff was to come from culture and heritage grants and aids, and you're looking at a land-based where the study's at, it's clearly on Lesquiti. But the presentation that he made a very good job of pointed out the general benefits as an exploring a process that could be duplicated and utilized elsewhere, and the mainly supported gathering of histories and using those in a way that supported reconciliation for all. That's the appeal that I heard. It's absolutely okay to put that in general grants and aid, but it doesn't exclude it from being a social issue worthy of support. So I don't accept the argument that it doesn't belong in social planning. I never have. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Director Elliott. Director McCormick, and then I see Director Doubt with a yellow piece of paper.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I support the motion that is before us. I believe that this project definitely fits under social planning. And it's important that they get the $10,000 to do the project. It's less important to them, which, bank account it comes from, as long as they can get the money. I agree that Area E has been shortchanged in general grants and aid. And again, that comes back to a discussion that we need to have in the future regarding how this whole granting process works. So for the time being, I definitely support this. I think Skeety is entitled to do the project. It's a good project. And yeah, social planning fits for me. So I'm happy with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Director Dowd.
Yeah, so, as I said earlier, looking originally at the agenda, I didn't see any reason not to approve any of these grant applications in the full amount that everybody was requesting for. We can't include this in the grant and aid service because there is no longer enough funds in the granting aid service to do that. I am perfectly happy to vote in favor of including this project as a cultural heritage project in the social planning service. As long as that definition continues to be the definition for the social planning service as we go along. Cultural heritage projects somewhere within the regional district. Makes sense to me. Director Brander has read out the bylaw that establishes the service. Very, very broad. Multiculturalism, culture, I won't name them all, but I'm quite willing to vote in favor of putting this in the social planning service and providing that $10,000 for that service. So, great.
Thank you, Director Dowd. Is anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? And then I'll speak because I haven't spoken yet. Director Lennox is the only one who hasn't, but he's watching, which is good. So, even though I've made many impassioned claims about this, I think there's a couple of things I want to raise. One, and I had some prepared comments, but now the motion is a little different than in the agenda, so I will try to speak to it. The one is the general concept of the tax inequity that Lesquity has been facing in the general grants and aid and how we might begin to rectify that. And I would just like to point out that this inequity exists in the social planning service as well. So by moving it to social planning helps in that respect as well. And I'll describe it. And I provided by email some summary of historical information of contributions to general grant and aid. The social planning service is a little easier. It only started in 2019. And over that time frame, Lesquity has contributed $21,000 approximately to grants. That's taking out the portion that goes to for the social planner. That's the grants are approximately 2/3 or 70% of the total. Including this year's budgeted amount, it's about $28,000. Over that time frame, groups from Lesquity have received about $5,000. That's $1,000 per year for the food bank and $1,500 for the Wednesday night social. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is this: there's still an issue of tax inequity, but it doesn't matter which pot we bring it out of, because as Director McCormick said, the group doesn't really care. And I think the taxpayer doesn't really care. There is a broader issue that I think we need to resolve at a later time about grants and aid. And we've talked about many things, not just for Lesquity, but multi-year and other issues and who pays for what. I think the bylaw as read by Director Brander makes sense. Some things, not every project can fit in both, but I think this one can lift. We obviously can, because we moved it from one to the other. So I think there's a practical side, which is my second part, which is really there's the fairness issues that we need to work out later, I think, as a team to resolve all these grants and aid process. But I think right now we have a practical issue, which is we've got these pots of money. We have now moved, or this committee moved LIFT to be considered under general grants and aid. So I think this actually helps relieve pressure there, so that we can provide the support that's needed without undue reductions or having more dissension over how these grants. I would like us to come together and support these things to the level that they're deserving of. And so I think that's really worthy here. And I'd just like to point out one other point, which is I looked, as you know, I've read a lot of the background on some of these, and this is just how I'll conclude, which is we have precedent for this kind of grant. In 2014, the Powell River Diversity Initiative received $15,000 for their project called Educating Our Region About the Tla'amin Nation. The application stated, this project involves the development of an historical, cultural, and social toolkit to provide an innovative approach to increase conversations and understanding among neighbors in the region's Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities. Prior to granting those funds, the board sent a letter of intent that stated, the proposed project is an excellent way to educate the entire region of the long-standing presence of First Nations people in this area. The projected outcomes of this initiative will lend itself to better understanding and appreciation of the past, present, and future. The Layered History Project, I believe, will continue this important work on reconciliation and education, and I'm really hoping this committee can provide sufficient support to move this forward. Thank you. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Thank you. Kind of all over the place. Just heard about a grant application from 2014, 2016. Social Planning Service didn't exist then. We're talking about the tax inequity, but then we're not talking about the tax inequity. I thought that was part of the discussion for the reason why it was originally general grant and aid. Now that it's moved to social planning, you are correct. Those that receive the money don't really care where it comes from. But I do disagree with the statement that the taxpayers don't care. Because I know the taxpayers of Area B do care. And it's been a long-standing issue when the electoral areas are paying for something and it's described as a regional benefit, and yet the electoral areas are the only one paying. There is a tax inequity when it comes to our grants, and it exists in general grant and aid. Now we're talking about the Social Planning Service. Director Brander has correctly pointed out the definitions in our service establishment bylaw for the Social Planning Service. It is vague, it is broad, it is far-reaching, and essentially it allows us to pass out grants for almost anything. But it only comes from the electoral areas. So my answer is no. If we're going to deal with the tax inequity, then we do it with what was discussed for the last month, general grant and aid. Moving it to social planning says, yeah, we got to make up the tax inequity, but the electoral areas will do it, not the whole region. And I thought we were discussing that today. We were discussing it last month, but now we're saying, well, we'll discuss that later. I don't know what we're discussing now. I'm opposed.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. To be clear, we're discussing the motion before us, which is to fund $10,000 to the Layered History Project from social planning grants.
Oh, I can read it.
Is there any further, well, the question was raised. So is there any further discussion on this item before us? Seeing none, I will call the question then. All those in favor? All those opposed? One opposed. Director Gisborne, thank you. It carries. Okay, so the next item, 5.4, Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try again. I have a motion in front of me that the committee recommend to the board that the board approve a grant of $2,445 to the Lesquity Island Nature Conservancy for the landowner stewardship program from the Social Planning Service. And again, if I get a seconder, I'll speak to that.
I'll second that.
Okay, Director Brander.
I'm going to go right back to the bylaw again, and I'll read off just a portion of it, but it says facilitation for community needs and interests in social, cultural, economic, and environmental affairs within community populations. So I also feel that this project could fall under the Social Planning Service based on the definition in the bylaw.
Thank you. Director McCormick and then Director Gisborne.
Thank you. I support the Lesquity Island Conservancy get the funding. But when I look at the minutes from our last meeting, we approved a grant of $5,000 to the Savory Island Land Trust from the Electoral Area A grant and aid. And this is a very similar recommendation. It's a grant for the to the Lesquity Nature Conservancy. And I'm just wondering, does that not put us in a weird situation where two applications for basically the same sort of grant are being funded different ways? I guess that is a question, Chair, if I may ask to staff.
Okay, Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. The decision on where to fund the grants is it's up to the Assembly, but the default is always general grants and aid. So generally we try to take them from the area that benefits from the grant, like the place that it best fits. But the general grants and aid, as I said, is always the default in the legislation. So any grants can be funded from general grants and aid.
Well, I'm just wondering then, again, it comes back to having a broader discussion, but these are two recommendations that are very similar and we should be funding them the same way. It seems weird to fund one out of an area grant and aid and one out of social planning. So, I mean, I'll support the recommendation before us, but I do think we need to clarify for ourselves in the future how we want these particular types of grants to be funded, because we're doing it in different ways that, I don't know, I think they should be the same for consistency. But in any case, yeah, I think they should get the money. So,
Thank you, Director McCormick. Director Gisborne.
Director McCormick's right. We hand out grants for almost identical initiatives, but we make Area A pay for that one. Only Area A. This one, well, it was going to be general grant and aid to kind of make up the disparity, but now it's the electoral areas that are making up the disparity. So when it comes to Savory, it'll just be up to Area A to pay. But when it comes to Lasqueti, it'll be up to the electoral areas to pay if this motion passes. Director Brander read out the bylaw. You might have also heard that the bylaw also covers economic benefit. So why do we have an economic development service? Well, that's for economic benefit. There is a much greater discussion to be had about what is social planning and whether it's a social benefit or a cultural heritage, and what's economic development and whether it's an economic development benefit. But we've all been to community events. Downside Jazz, Prisma, they have social benefit. They have economic benefit. They have community benefit. That's true for pretty much all events in this community. Even things that are almost appear to be exclusively social benefit, they also have an economic benefit, makes our community attractive. I don't think the question should be, well, does it fit social benefit? The question should be who pays? Which taxpayer pay? Is it fair that Area A is expected to carry the weight of a grant from Savory Island? But now that we got one from Lasqueti, originally I think was recommended to be, well, Lasqueti pays just like Savory. But then the discussion became there is a funding disparity, a tax disparity that is inappropriate for Lasqueti. And I agreed with that. And I supported trying to rectify that issue through these grants. But now we're discussing, well, we use social planning to fund it, but we're not talking about the wealth disparity. In that case, I'll move the amendment that it doesn't come from social planning. It comes from Area E, because we're not talking about the cost disparity. So I'll move that amendment.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seeing none, we carry on the motion before us. Kelsey, if you're done, Mr. Director Gisborne, I have a comment. I have actually three comments. One was to address the issue of them being the same. They're not the same. We funded already a grant application from the Lasqueti Island Nature Conservancy out of Area E Grants and Aid for their newsletter. The SILT, the Savory Island Land Trust application out of Area A Grants and Aid was of a similar nature. It was for local information, primarily benefiting and educating the local public in the area that they serve, which is Savory Island and Lasqueti Island, and those areas paid, and that was the proper thing to do. This case, this application is a general, it's a landowner stewardship program to provide landowners with information and support for conservation in the coastal Douglas fir ecological zone and associated ecosystems. It will provide a template for broader areas. The coastal Douglas fir zone and the nearby ecosystems, adjacent ecosystems, cover most of the regional district, in particular, all of Lesquiti and most of Texada, Powell River, from Saltery Bay, Savory Island, everywhere except for the inland mountains. This will provide a template. A discussion or a question came up at the last time around. Would the Lesquiti group reach out to SILT and other groups? And I reached out to Link, and the answer is yes. They will be working with people across the region, and they're very good at that, and they will be providing a template to help landowners conserve their land, because as we know from our own acquisition attempts, it costs a lot of money, and most of the land is private and it's very endangered. And this is for $2,445, a pittance of money, we can help them provide a regional benefit that would be beneficial across the region for conservation of ecological values on private land, which is most of the land. That's point one. Point two is, how are we here? Would it be better to have stuck with the general grant and aid? I would have preferred that, but I would have also preferred to leave the LIFT CRC funding coming from social planning. So we we're here having this item being considered in social planning because we moved the LIFT funding. If we do something else, if we don't fund this, that will cause some disruption to on the Lesquiti side, further the tax inequity. If we force it back into general grants and aid, then we'll have to cut funding, which we've heard from some directors that the insistence on having full funding for LIFT, which is possible. And this is a solution. So it's not a long-term multi-year solution. And I agree with the comments that we need to have a discussion. I think this whole process has tested our nerves. It's tested me. I've written a lot. I've thought a lot about this. We need a broad, open discussion at a future time to talk about who pays, how they're paying, who benefits, all of that down the road. And our grant and aid services don't work the way we need them to work. We can't fit the things into the right boxes and get the right people paying for the right services. That seemed clear, but that's not what's on the table before us. What's on the table before us is $2,445. And instead of funding LIFT, $50,000 from social planning, we're talking about funding a small amount for Lesquiti from social planning. And the last point I'd like to make, which I wasn't really planning on entirely, but I'm going to make it anyways, because last weekend was Arts Festival and hundreds of people. And I asked people come up to me and they ask me, how's it going? And especially people associated with these groups, what's the status of our grants? When I told them what we had done, when I told them that we decided to postpone the decision on this item until after Finance Committee made a determination regarding groups that are based in Powell River, you can imagine what the reaction was. The reaction, some people were more mild and some people made comments that I wouldn't repeat. The process of doing that made it feel that the requests from Lesquiti applicants were secondary. And I'll give you an example, because I would just like the Assembly to consider an apparent inconsistency of what we've done. Last week, we voted on two other applications from General Grant and Aid, the Powell River Salmon Society and the Island North Film Commission. We did this at the board meeting. These passed unanimously without a word. The Salmon Society and the Laird History applications are both one-off projects, both from groups that have not previously received general grants. I support the Salmon Society project, but the justification for postponing the Laird History project and this one until after other applications applied equally to the Salmon Society project. So those words, that postponement only came up, and I don't want to dwell on that because we have this motion in front of us, but it does make the residents of Lesquiti feel that the applicants from Lesquiti are secondary, and that's why I could not support the motion to postpone, even though I can see the merit in doing that, and I think we're having an important discussion. Lesquiti may be small, but it should be considered an equal partner on a per capita basis. So I really hope the board supports this, the committee supports this. I think we have a process that's not as clean as we would like, but it provides the funding to the groups that need the funding, and we can move forward. Thank you. Director Doubt, I believe I saw your yellow paper.
Yeah, you did. And I've been trying all day to be supportive of this grant application. And I agree with Director Brander's interpretation of the social planning bylaw that this can be included in the definition of a grant under the social planning service. I agree with that. Okay. I agree with staff's position that it is up to the discretion of the board which granting service we take funds from to pay things. I agree with that 100%. I agree and I care about the fact that we're spending money, and I care about the organizations, and I care about each and every taxpayer, because all of this money, whichever box you want to draw around individuals, all of these funds come from taxpayers. Taxpayers in the city have a right to exist too and contribute as well. Okay. But here we are talking about a very worthwhile project, which Lasqueti Island wants to do for some $2,445. We've spent about $10,000 talking about it so far, I'm sure. I'm in favor of spending that money, while I'm also in favor of doing it in a reasonable way. And since our motion to postpone that I made, as I recall from the board meeting, I made it to make sure that we were all making our decisions with full information in hand on all of the decisions that were before the board. We've got a lot more information in hand now, and I'd like to proceed to the question so we can vote to decide to do this.
I agree. Thank you very much. We've talked a lot about this. Director Gisborne, anything new you'd like to add? Because we are now at 3:19 and we have another meeting in 40 minutes.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I completely agree with you, Director Fall. If this has a regional benefit, then it should come from general grant and aid. I'm also, there's a lot of people out in Paradise Valley in Area B that have coastal Douglas fir on their farm. So if they're going to be engaged, I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So any further comments? Seeing none, I will call the question on this item. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Director Gisborne, it passes. Okay. On to Therapeutic Riding Association 5.5. Director Elliott. Oh, right. Director Elliott has to leave.
Yes, I'd like to declare conflict as I sit on the board of directors for Powell River Therapeutic Riding. So I will leave the room. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott. We'll wait till you're out. Till I see Director Gisborne has his hand up. Is Director Elliott out of the room? Yes. Okay, so Director Gisborne.
I'd like to move the motion that is in our agenda, which is $5,000 to Powell River Therapeutic Riding from general grant and aid.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Director Brander. Okay. Is there any question, any debate on this item?
Just that they're a wonderful organization and they provide a regional benefit, even if Lasqueti is a little bit far for them.
Okay. So, and seeing no further debate on that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Carried. It passes unanimously. We can get Director Elliott back in the room.
Watch from out there.
Okay, so now we're back to lift. And before we continue, I would just like to ask our manager of financial services, or Mr. Cohenhoven, if he's on, what the current amounts are left. My calculation is that there is exactly $50,000 after the previous recommendations, but.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is $50,000 left in the general grants and aid now that the Lake Landowner Stewardship Program and the Lasqueti Community Association programs have been moved to social planning.
Okay, thank you. And corporate officer, are we back to debating the motion of $50,000 from general grant and aid to lift?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So further discussion on, so the motion before us is $50,000. Oh, corporate officer?
Sorry, I just should say that there's no requirement for a mover or seconder, and you can't, without permission of the assembly, extend debate. So the limits of the debate before it sort of continues on.
Okay, so we probably all spoke a lot before, but I will allow one round, I think, just because if needed. Hopefully we've discussed this sufficiently. So Director Gisborne.
Good. We get one chance to now to talk about $50,000 from general grant and aid going to lift. That's my understanding. Even though one of the big discussions going on earlier was who else can we have funding available for? That's no longer part of the discussion. So in my opinion, the discussion's changed, but what do I know? When I take a look at the revenue and expenses for the CRC, they get $110,000, $109 from the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. They have for expenses $127,000 of salaries and benefits to their staff. We have passed a motion to give under $30,000 to ORUG, which is entirely volunteer run. And they look after our trails. And they do a damn good job out there. I don't feel comfortable giving Lyft more money than ORUG. We got to take into account the cost of the community, the responsibility of different levels of government, and the burden on the taxpayers and on the community. If the amount was $20,000 to Lyft, or some amount that was lower than what we've given to ORUG, I would be inclined to support. But for us to give under 30,000 to ORUG and turn around and give 50 to Lyft, sorry, I can't support that.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there anyone else with further comments before we vote on this? I don't see any. Oh, Director McCormick.
Yeah, just to say that I think we should be considering each application on its own merits and not in relation to what we may or may not have given to other groups. So I'm looking at the Lyft recommendation on its own.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other comments? Final one, seeing none, I will call the question. This is for $50,000 for Lyft from general grants and aid. So all those in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Director Gisborne, it carries. Okay, boy, that was good. Does anyone need a 5-minute break before we go on, or are we good to do the last? I think the last one might be quick, so unless there's something urgent. Okay, there's no correspondence. I'll carry on. So if you need, ask me. Correspondence, there's none, so there's no business. We have a report, item 8.1, with a recommendation for the financial planning process for the upcoming fiscal. Someone want to make the motion? Director Gisborne? Is there a seconder? Director Lennox? Any discussion on this? I guess I have a question for Ms. Green, and just so she can clarify. So I think this is more or less the same time. Is this the same more or less process as last year and the same timing as last year in terms of when things will come before us?
Yes, it is the same timing. The only difference is that the recommended fees for the Myrtle Pond water system, land sewer system, cemeteries and campgrounds, those are coming 1 month later. They came in September last year because of the local government election.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll note that we've been able to pass our budget in February the last 2 years, which is fantastic. So we don't have as much sweat on our brows. Okay, so Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I know we've passed our budget in February in the last several years, but it seems like we keep running into this problem of, not discussing the issues of tax inequity, which grant sources have sufficient funding. Like, we don't seem to put enough money into general grant and aid. And I'm just wondering, is there a plan to actually deal with that? Or are we going to be back in the same situation a year from now? Because it seems like and I apologize for those that are new in their first term, but this feels like seems like I got deja vu right now.
Well, thank you, Director Gisborne. I'd say that's up to the board, and what I would invite any of the committee members who feel passionate about this to bring forward notices of motion. It's up to us to do something. Staff won't just do it unless we ask. So I think we need to think about this and come back with measured motions, notices of motions, and try to move this forward in a timely manner so it can be rolled into the financial planning process. Okay, Director Elliott had her hand, and then Director Dout.
Yeah, so my comments are along the same lines as Director Gisborne's. I would like to see as part of our budgeting process, a discussion dedicated to kind of the history behind many of the grant programs, how we got where we are, how they're funded, and coming out of that discussion, maybe we as a board get to figure out what kinds of motions we might like to make in order to change things so they work better for us. So I don't know where that fits in the budgeting process, because I don't think we want to make budget decisions until we've had that conversation. So I just want it I think this is just input, and I'm in favor of the motion. I just want it in the schedule somewhere along the line when we're doing our planning for our budget process. And I don't think that's contradictory to what's right here in front of us for the motion. I just think it's input from us as to what we want as part of our process. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll ask the corporate officer to make that happen. Would the appropriate process be a notice of motion at a future meeting sooner than later, and then to make specific requests for history of whatever services or features that we would like as part of that, and it should come early so we can do something. But I see a nodding head. So I think that's the appropriate thing, a notice of motion for a presentation from our financial staff on the history of how we got to where we are would be useful. Director Doubt, I see your hand, or saw your hand.
Yeah. So we've got in front of us a document, which is actually not just a piece of paper that doesn't mean anything. It's an actual serious plan for getting to the final target of a financial plan. And the target, one of the first targets in there is November 1st, 2023, a 2024 to 2028 recommended financial plan, draft 1. That I expect, having seen a few budgets before, will have a budget for the social planning service, for the grants in aid service, for all the services that the regional district provides. It's open to any board member at a finance committee or a board meeting before that time to ask for a report on whatever history they want, so they can be fully informed and making those decisions. At the latest, in November of 2023, we will have the numbers in front of us as a board, and we can start making serious decisions. Those grant numbers are not just a line in a very long report. They become a serious bone of contention at this time of year when we're trying to decide how to apportion the money and how to be fair about it. So any one of the board members, new board members and existing board members, have the opportunity between now and November 1st to pass motions or make motions and ask staff for any kind of reports they want about the history of anything. And as board members, we have a responsibility to ask those questions and ask for that information so we can be making informed decisions. So I'm happy to see the program here, but the program does not start at the end when we're approving the final budget. It starts right away and gets underway in October, and is getting down to the serious work on the 1st of November.
Thank you, Director. Very good comments. So yes, it's up to us if we want to make change or be better informed. Okay, are there any further comments on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. No new business. A question period. Is Mr. Galinsky or anyone else on the line?
Yes, Chair Galinsky here. I don't have any questions this afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So there's no in-camera session, so we are adjourned, 3:32. Thank you very much, everyone. And see you in half an hour.
Okay. Probably just going to leave the session on.